Oh, it's not tonight.
Yeah.
Okay. Aha, aha. Hello?
We're staying up for a digital adjustment.
Yeah, I can just see it. Okay, good. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so everyone can hear me? Okay. My father hardly talked about being in World War II when I was growing up. I thought it was because he was invincible and he didn't have to. I saw the scars, but I just wanted him to be my Superman. I wanted to feel safe within his fortified walls. But my dad had a really large scar on his shoulder, his left shoulder and arm. That's where they had removed the shrapnel. He explained to me, he said, Carol, they are not going to get all of it. There's always going to be little pieces left over. Some souvenir, I thought. Carol, talk to me in my good ear. My dad had lost his hearing. He was completely deaf in his left ear. It happened one night during the war. He was walking a little bit too close to when a landmine had exploded. He was just inches away, just inches. So his physical scars were pretty evident, but his emotional ones, not as much. My dad had gotten 3 Purple Hearts from being wounded 3 times during the war. He was a soldier in the 28th Infantry. And he had kept these medals in a box, in a drawer, in a room that hardly anybody ever used. Dad, did you encounter anti-Semitism at all during the war? Not really, Carol. Well, there was this one time during basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, when my training sergeant said, "Hey, Jew boy, take off your helmet. I want to see your horns."
Yeah.
But you know, he had never seen a Jewish person before. He was from Arkansas. It wasn't his fault. Dad, what about a sense of your Jewish identity? I mean, you were there fighting Hitler, who had exterminated 6 million Jews. That's when my dad told me about his bold escape to go AWOL. AWOL? Dad, absence without leave. I mean, isn't that illegal? Why'd you do it? He said, well, heck, I wanted to see Paris. He explained to me that he had just been released from a hospital outside of Paris, and the plan was to put him right back out onto the front lines. He was so close to Paris, he didn't know if he'd ever be able to see Paris again in his life. And so he went. It was Rosh Hashanah, and the first stop he made was at the Rothschild Synagogue. The synagogue was closed. Paris had just been liberated. But the shamus was there, the person that took care of the synagogue. And so he let my dad in, and they stayed for a while, and they talked. And my father said, you know, Carol, it felt really good. I needed family, and he was there. Then years later, he began to let out little snippets of his recollections of the war. He told my husband and I about the time that he was in a foxhole, and there was shells, fire all around. And he was right next to his buddy, just inches away. And one moment he looked over and he saw him, and in the next he looked back. His friend was gone, dead, from the explosion. My dad just shrugged. I mean, what else could he say? And then it was when I had a family, I had my own kids, and my dad told me about his strategy for how he made it through the war, and how he used that strategy with his own family, with us. He said, Carol, I just had to wear blinders. I remember the day that my captain and I, we were together, side by side on the ground. I had the hard-shelled radio on my back, and my job was to relay my captain's orders so they would know where to aim the artillery. And I believed that as long as I wore those blinders, and as long as I believed that that hard-shelled radio would keep me safe, I would be okay. Carol, you had to think like that, or else you'd crack. And our family, Carol, is like a fortress, and nothing could penetrate our walls. As long as you think like that, we can stay one unit, and no harm will come to us. Well, a couple of years ago, my dad and I were talking, and he was telling me about when he was in a hospital in France, and he said, I remember there were 4 men and 5 legs. And that image just seared into my mind. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was trying to do the math. 4 men, 5 legs, and I knew that my father, thank God, had 2 legs. You know, and I realized you can't get through that stuff emotionally unscathed. But my dad felt great about talking about the more upbeat times. He told me about the time he was on a hospital train, and there was a Red Cross volunteer. She was an actress from London, and her sister had gotten killed in the London Blitz. So she made this radical turn in her career. She stopped acting, and she wanted to help the soldiers. She was Alfred Hitchcock's first icy blonde, and her name was Madeleine Carroll. My dad had seen all of her movies, and he said he was madly in love with her. So you can imagine how happy he was when she was walking down the aisle. He thought he was seeing things. Yeah. Well, in one hand she had crosses, and in the other hand she had mezuzahs, which is a blessing inside of a casing. And she went over to my father, and she handed him a mezuzah, and she gave him a kiss on the forehead. And he said, "Oh my gosh, I thought I died and went to heaven." But you know, Carol, I needed family, and she was there for me. Well, a couple of months ago, my father passed away. He had been fighting a different kind of battle, prostate cancer. And he had become sweeter, softer, more gentle. His blinders had worn thin. And my husband and I, we had gone to France. So 1 year ago, about right now, we went over to France. And we spent time in Normandy. And we called my dad every single day. And we told him about all the things that we were seeing. And we compared them with what he had experienced during the war. "Dad, today we saw the beaches of D-Day. We saw the American cemetery. We saw the German bunkers. And tomorrow, Dad, we're going to go to St. Lo. You know, where you got injured the second time." St. Lo had been taken over by the Germans, and it was almost totally destroyed. In fact, the writer Samuel Beckett described it as the capital of the ruins. It was that flattened and decimated. And so the 29th Infantry had gone in to liberate St. Lo. My dad's infantry, the 28th, had gone in a little bit after to relieve the 29th. And there were still skirmishes going on, and they had to push back the German lines and fortifications. So that next day, when my husband and I went to St. Lo, we went right to the tourist office, and we said, "We'd like to see a World War II memorial." And she smiled. She said, "I'm sorry, but they're all closed." We told her about my father, how he had been injured, and he was with the 28th in St. Lo, and she smiled again, and she said, "Come back at 5 o'clock, and I will take you there myself." So we did. We came back at 5 o'clock, and in the meantime, she had called the curator of the memorial. So when we got there, we were greeted by this very short, older man. He was around in his 80s, and he had a thick shock of white hair and a big smile, and he said, "Bonjour, I would like to take you there myself. My name is Monsieur Le Troubeau." And so he took us to this 12th century church. And inside we talked. He said in the summer of 1944 he was a teenager. And when the American soldiers came through, well, one of them gave him his first piece of gum and his first cigarette. He laughed. He said, "I didn't tell my mother about the cigarette." And we told him about my father and how he had been part of the 28th. And he said, "Your father's infantry, they liberated my sister's village not far from here. What your father did for us." And it made me think about, was my father ever thanked? Do soldiers get thanked? I mean, my father was so busy being on the front lines and then being in the hospital and then cycling back 2 more times to the front lines, to the hospital, and then being shipped home on a hospital ship. Who had time for appreciations? Just then I looked over, and I saw that my husband was dialing my father on his cell phone to West Palm Beach, Florida. He said, "Stanley, we're here in St. Lo at a World War II memorial, and there's somebody that would like to speak with you." And so Monsieur Le Troubeau got on the phone, and he said, "I don't know how to begin to thank you for what you did for me and for our people. You came all the way over here from America and you didn't even know us. Thank you. And my father said, it was my pleasure. I did what I thought was right. Nobody has ever thanked me before. This dialogue happened 68 years after World War II in a stone chapel whose interior walls are decorated with the American military flags, with photographs of fallen American soldiers. This dialogue took place between a liberated French man and my father, an American soldier. Across the miles, over 4,000 miles, across the ocean, and across time, my father wore no blinders to protect his emotions, and he cried. Thank you.